The morning of December 26, 2014, started for the employees of the DoubleTree Hotel in Portland, Oregon, just like any other day. In the midst of the holiday season, at a conveniently located hotel across from a large shopping center, it was hard to find an available room. Guests were coming and going. It was during this time that someone from the staff found the body of a young woman on the staircase. She was dressed inappropriately for the season, had no identification on her, and at first glance, it seemed like she might have accidentally fallen down the stairs, but only at first glance. When detectives began piecing together the fragments of this unusual case, they made a series of unsettling discoveries. They would have to contend with three potential suspects, a mysterious double-faced guest, and a victim with a dark secret. 24-year-old Ashley Benson always seemed like a very happy person. Until the age of 13, she lived in Montana with her mother and then moved to the suburbs of Portland, Oregon to live with her father, Michael, and stepmother, Jody. She had wonderful relationships with her father, and soon, she genuinely grew to love her stepmother. The move was a significant change in the girl's life, but it turned out to be beneficial for her. In Portland, she blossomed. She spent a lot of time with her family, loved outdoor activities, and made many friends at school. Friends adored her for her easygoing nature, infectious laughter, and kindness. One of her friends recalls that Ashley was one of those people who would give you the shirt off her back. But at the age of 17, her life took a sharp turn. She gave birth to a son, whom they named after the child's father, Marlon, her boyfriend of 2 years. Despite their young age, Ashley and Marlon tried to raise the child together. At first, everything seemed fine, but in 2008, after finishing school, they moved in together. And when the young family was left to fend for themselves, things became difficult. Ashley had always wanted to pursue higher education, but had to give up on her dream so they could support themselves financially. Unfortunately, the young parents couldn't cope with the challenges and eventually separated. Her son remained living with Ashley. The situation she found herself in was very challenging, but she managed. She found housing for herself and her son, took on any odd jobs she could find, and slowly got back on her feet. Over the next few years, the young woman dedicated herself entirely to her son. However, she was still very young and must have felt that something was missing from her life. So, soon enough, Marcus Giles entered her life. Ashley and Marcus started dating and moved in together in Vancouver, Washington. While Ashley's family was initially glad to hear about the new man in her life, they began to notice changes in her. She, who had always been very open, preferred not to delve into the details of her new relationship. So only deeply concerning rumors reached her family. Marcus did everything to keep Ashley away from her family and friends, not allowing her to use their car, even though Ashley was the one paying for it, all the bills, and the apartment rent. In other words, the man was living off her money while dictating what she should do. Of course, Ashley's father and stepmother tried to bring up this issue during their rare meetings with their daughter, but there was little they could do as she was of legal age. In reality, things were much worse, and Ashley's parents found out about it in September 2013 when the terrified girl called her father. Through tears, she cried to Michael that Marcus had attacked her. She was locked in the bathroom and couldn't get out. Michael called Marcus and threatened him with physical harm if he didn't release his daughter. Immediately after the conversation with the young man, he contacted the police and rushed to Vancouver. When Michael arrived, Ashley and her son had already managed to escape from the apartment through the window. But now it became clear to him that his daughter was experiencing relationship violence. She had scratches on her face, a bruise under her eye, and a split lip. Ashley agreed to temporarily move out of the apartment, but soon everything returned to its place, and she continued living with Marcus. Her family tried to convince her to at least take a break from him, and sometimes it seemed like she was ready to do that. But months passed, and nothing changed. By that time, the decisions made by Ashley began to worry Marlon's father. He went to court regarding custody of the child, and the judge ruled in his favor. At the same time, Ashley's family was concerned that there was something in their daughter's life that they didn't know about. Unfortunately, their intuition was not wrong. Christmas of 2014 arrived. Ashley's son spent time with Marlon and his family, while the young woman herself came to give gifts to her relatives. She was brought by Marcus, but he sat in the car and didn't even enter the girl's parents' house. It seemed that Ashley was in high spirits, but she couldn't stay for long. Explaining that they planned to watch a movie with Marcus and maybe a few friends and have a quiet evening, she left. The rest of Ashley's family spent the rest of the holiday as usual. They couldn't even imagine that they had a reason to worry about the girl until the next morning when Marcus called them. The young man informed them that he couldn't get in touch with Ashley. Michael and Jody knew that Ashley had a habit of letting her phone completely run out of battery. Plus, she never kept track of time. Usually, after a few hours, she would call back as if nothing had happened. They were confident that this was one of those cases, but they still began calling their daughter, trying to reach her. However, as time passed, their concern grew. It was at that moment they received a call. And this call not only shattered their world, but also explained why they felt that Ashley was hiding something from them. While Michael and Jody were increasingly anxious, a few kilometers away, the staff at the DoubleTree Hotel in Portland was experiencing a different kind of crisis. The morning started as usual during the busy holiday season, but then everything changed abruptly. Around 11 a.m., a hotel staff member found a body in the stairwell on the 8th floor. Just behind the door, he saw a young woman lying motionless on the floor. It was clear that she couldn't be helped anymore. When detectives arrived, they immediately noticed that the young woman was dressed inappropriately for the cold winter. She wore dark pants and a white blouse without a coat or jacket, and without shoes or socks. There were no bags, phones, or documents with her. Therefore, investigators assumed that she was a hotel guest, and her belongings must have been left in her room. She had no visible injuries except for marks on her neck, suggesting she hadn't fallen down the stairs, but was likely strangled. This assumption would soon be confirmed. The young woman's nails also caught their attention. It was clear that she had recently had a bright manicure for the holidays, but most of the nails on her left hand were broken, and there was no nail on her left index finger. However, they couldn't find any nails near her body. This led the police to conclude that they were dealing with a murder, and the victim had fiercely fought her attacker, but the murder didn't occur in the stairwell. However, after speaking with the hotel staff, the investigation hit a roadblock. No one could remember the victim. As far as they knew, no one matching her description had checked in or out. They also learned that a new surveillance system was being installed in the building, and the cameras weren't operational yet. This meant that the police had to rely on old-fashioned methods without the aid of video footage. With no other options, the officers started going room to room, knocking on doors and talking to guests. It was a time-consuming and challenging task, given that the hotel was nearly full on the holiday, and there were 10 floors to cover. They started with the rooms closest to the 8th floor, believing that the murderer likely wanted to move the body as little as possible to avoid drawing attention from potential witnesses. Most guests used the elevator, but someone from the staff could have used the stairs. Fortunately, the officers didn't have to go through all the hotel rooms. The front desk staff recalled that a woman had been calling them all morning, inquiring about her friend. She knew that her friend was staying in room 715 with a man named Chris. Officers asked the staff to check the registration log, and they found that room 715 was registered to a Chris Yoon. Chris Yoon had reserved the room for December 26th, but he had arrived a day earlier and asked if he could check in sooner, which was accommodated. He had paid in cash and left before the body was discovered, simply leaving the keys at the front desk without formally checking out. This situation raised an interesting legal nuance. Since the man had vacated the room on his own, they couldn't obtain a search warrant in his name because once he left, the room became public property. Fortunately, the hotel chose to cooperate fully with the police and allowed them to inspect the room. The room appeared relatively clean, with only 2 socks and a pizza box in the trash. However, while crime scene investigators were taking photographs, they made a chilling discovery: a piece of acrylic nail that matched the one found on the unidentified victim. Now, investigators were confident they were heading in the right direction. With heightened suspicions, the police turned their attention to Chris Yoon and discovered that he lived in a multi-apartment building in Bellevue, Washington. At the same time, officers discovered whether any calls had been made from room 715 and found another lead. Calls had been made from the room based on an advertisement posted on the Backpage website. This website often featured ads from women offering escort services, and this particular ad turned out to be one of those. The woman went by the name Veronica. The attached photos matched the victim found on the stairwell landing. Her real name was unlikely to be Veronica, but she wouldn't remain an unidentified victim for long. The floor-by-floor search had paid off entirely. Near an ice cream vending machine, officers found a purse, and in it were documents with a photo of the victim and the name Ashley Renee Benson. Detectives delivered the news to Ashley's family. They were utterly devastated. They had to confront not only their daughter's death, but also the fact that she had led a double life. The family had been concerned about her relationship with Marcus, but it turned out that there were far more difficulties in her life. They couldn't understand why she hadn't come to them with her problems. Given that her secret nightlife came as a surprise to them, they couldn't provide any information about how she ended up at the hotel. As far as they knew, she was planning to watch a movie with Marcus. However, they advised the detectives to speak with Marlon and Marcus. Marlon was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Since Ashley was killed on Christmas Day, Marlon had spent the day with his family and could prove it. He was aware that Ashley had been providing escort services. This was precisely why he had been fighting for custody of their son, and the judge had ruled in his favor. She believed that if Ashley couldn't make informed decisions for herself, she wouldn't be able to do so for her young son either. The judge also recognized that Ashley was a very intelligent, pleasant, and loving mother, and tried to reach out to her, explaining that such a lifestyle often led to negative consequences. It was like talking to a brick wall. On the other hand, it was understandable why the family's suspicions turned to Marcus. He had mistreated Ashley, and they suspected he controlled various aspects of her life. Investigators learned that Marcus had prior run-ins with the police, including assault charges. His alibi wasn't as solid as Marlon's. According to his statement, after dropping Ashley off at the hotel, he spent some time at home playing video games. And of course, no one could verify this. But before the detectives could fully digest this new information, they received yet another lead. And this one was simply incredible. They got a call from the hotel. Chris Yoon had just checked in again. When the detectives arrived at the hotel, the man was just leaving his room. They detained him. He couldn't understand what was happening but agreed to go to the police station. However, as they began to question him, the detectives quickly realized that something wasn't right. He seemed genuinely shocked that the police considered him involved in a murder. He had no knowledge of anyone named Ashley Benson, and most importantly, he hadn't been anywhere near the hotel until that day, December 26th. Furthermore, since everyone in the country was celebrating Christmas, he had plenty of witnesses, his family and friends, who could confirm that he was at home in Bellevue, Washington. He had a multitude of photos that corroborated his story, and he insisted that the police take his fingerprints and DNA. Chris explained that he was a DJ and had come to Portland for work, along with his fiancée. They had booked the room for December 26th, 2 months in advance. The detectives were baffled. Everything pointed to him as the killer, but Chris Yoon clearly couldn't have been in 2 places at once. Or could he? The detectives were beginning to realize that they would have to release their main suspect when suddenly one of them had an epiphany. He asked the man if he happened to know someone by the same name by sheer coincidence. Chris quickly replied no, but then he paused. In fact, in the same apartment complex in Bellevue, there was another Chris Yoon. The 2 men weren't related. What's more, their last names were spelled slightly differently, but pronounced the same. The detectives couldn't believe such an unbelievable coincidence. They pressed for details and found out that the man who arrived in Portland on December 25th had shown his driver's license with the name Tae Bum, Chris Yoon. The spelling of the last names didn't match, but he calmly explained that it was a typographical error. The hotel staff didn't find it strange. He paid in cash and went to his room. The detectives got even more incriminating evidence when they found Ashley's phone. The phone pinged, indicating that it was still somewhere near the hotel. The police combed the area and found it in a trash bin about 1.5 blocks from the hotel. In it, they discovered a multitude of messages sent by Chris to Ashley. The messages revealed that Chris had been a regular client of Ashley's for several months, and he had called and messaged her dozens of times on Christmas Day alone. However, tensions had been mounting between them before her death. Part of it was about money, and part of it was because Chris had become increasingly possessive of her, pressuring her to leave her current lifestyle and become his girlfriend. Each time Chris met with Ashley, he showered her with thousands of dollars, gifts, and extravagant restaurant visits. In return, he demanded that she have no other men in her life. Shortly before her murder, Chris sent her an email in which he wrote, "I will clarify everything before you read my message. I am determined to compensate you for all the time you spent on me. Before you cast me as guilty, I want you to know that you broke our agreement. You posted a new ad, and though I forgave you, I found other ads." From this email, it was clear that Ashley had promised Chris that she wouldn't post escort ads anymore, but Chris had discovered that she had deceived him. Now, the investigators were convinced that they had not only found the person responsible for Ashley's murder, but also understood his motive. They suspected that on the night of the murder, Chris had demanded that Ashley quit escorting for good, but she refused, declaring that she didn't want to see him anymore. In a fit of rage, he strangled her and left her body on the staircase. Everything was falling into place, but there was an obvious problem. Nobody knew where Chris was. He wasn't at his apartment in Bellevue, which he had rented just a month ago, and it was nearly empty of furniture. Chris's parents believed he was attending college and had no idea where their son was. Meanwhile, detectives learned that early on the morning of December 26th, Chris had attempted to check into another hotel. He was sweaty, and his face and neck were covered in numerous scratches. The clerk asked him what had happened, and he replied that he had argued with his family and he needed a place to get away from them. Chris wasn't given a room because he wanted to pay in cash, so he called a taxi and checked into a different Portland hotel. When the police finally obtained a search warrant and tracked Chris's cell phone, they arrived at this hotel too late. He had already left. However, while in the hotel, he had called other women who provided escort services. Now, investigators were worried that if they didn't act quickly, they might have 2 murders on their hands. Studying Chris's life, the detectives knew he often traveled on Amtrak trains, shuttling between Washington and Oregon. This turned out to be one of the final missing pieces that would allow them to capture him. Around 2 weeks after Ashley's murder, on January 7, 2015, investigators learned that Chris had checked into another hotel in the Portland area and had purchased a ticket to travel to Washington on the same day. Police split into 2 teams, with one heading to the hotel and the other to the Portland Union Station. As they approached the hotel, the detectives saw Chris Yun exit the building and get into a taxi. They rushed inside and asked the clerk if he knew the taxi driver and if he had the driver's phone number. The clerk called the driver and discreetly asked where they were headed. The police couldn't believe it when they discovered that Chris Yun was returning to the scene of the crime. While sitting in the car, they speculated about his intentions. Some murderers liked to return to the scene of their crimes to relive the emotions they felt during the act. However, it was more likely that he simply wanted to retrieve Ashley's purse, which the officers had already found, because Chris quickly entered and exited the hotel without incident. He got back into the taxi and headed straight for the train station, where he was surrounded by officers. The first thing he said to them was, "How did you find me?" During the interrogation, Chris behaved quite calmly, politely, and even modestly. He admitted that he had always found it difficult to communicate with women. He met Ashley several months ago when he called her in response to an ad. Chris did want her to be his girlfriend, but he denied being obsessed with her. He described their encounter on December 25th and admitted that they had argued about money. However, as soon as the detectives began to ask questions about the murder, he clammed up and demanded a lawyer. But what was particularly interesting was that Chris talked about Marcus. According to Chris Yun, Marcus was not Ashley's boyfriend at all. He not only knew about her escort work, but he was behind it all, controlling her both emotionally and physically, and forcing her into this activity. While it might seem like an attempt on Chris Yun's part to shift responsibility onto someone else, by this point, he was not the only one making such statements to the police. Some of Ashley's friends who knew about her work were aware of Marcus's involvement in it as well. Clearly, Ashley became a victim of human trafficking. People like Marcus are often referred to as Romeo pimps. They pretend to be boyfriends, but in reality, they manipulate vulnerable girls, often young single mothers, making them fall in love and then exploiting them, forcing them to earn money for them. Although such allegations are challenging to prove, Ashley herself admitted during a custody hearing a few months before her death that the money she earned went towards covering all the expenses for both her and Marcus, including rent and a car, the very car she was not allowed to drive. Initially, Marcus denied any involvement in Ashley's work, but gradually, he changed his statements, eventually admitting who Chris Yun was and revealing that he had driven Ashley to the hotel on the night of her murder. However, despite all of the above, there was no evidence to suggest that Marcus was directly involved in the murder. Only he treated Ashley as his property, unfortunately, much like Chris Yun, spending thousands of dollars on her, sometimes even giving her more than $5,000 at a time. Chris believed he had the right to dictate what Ashley should do. According to the detectives, when he arrived at the hotel that night, even if he wasn't firmly intent on killing her, he didn't rule out that possibility. Therefore, according to the police's theory, he either hacked into the other Chris Yoon's email or somehow learned that the other Chris Yoon was coming to Portland and decided to use his booked room number, possibly even framing him, a namesake, for the murder. During the search of his apartment and his phone, the police found evidence that he was involved in the illegal drug trade. This explained where he got the thousands of dollars he often gave to Ashley, despite having no job, while his parents believed he was a student. Although he initially insisted on his innocence and stated that he would contest the charges against him, he later agreed to a plea deal. In 2017, Tae Bom Yoon, or as he preferred to call himself, Chris Yoon, pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in the first degree and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. It is clear that he was not charged with any drug-related offenses, but the exact reasons for this are not entirely clear. It's possible that these were conditions of his plea deal. Charges of human trafficking against Marcus Giles were not proven in court. The Benson family filed a lawsuit against the owners of the hotel and the website where Ashley's advertisements were posted. Ashley's relatives claimed that these companies failed to conduct their business in a way that would prevent human trafficking, which ultimately led to Ashley's death. The Department of Justice subsequently closed the Backpage website, citing its facilitation and promotion of human trafficking. Unfortunately, the police discovered that whatever was happening in Ashley's life could have been going on for years. 4 years before her death, she was dating another guy, Latrell Poston, who was later charged with human trafficking. Latrell was 21 years old when he was sentenced to nearly 25 years in prison. Detectives revealed that he treated his victims as his property, much like Marcus did. Latrell also claimed to be Ashley's boyfriend, and even after his arrest, Ashley continued to send him profits from her work, although not always willingly. For example, according to court records, on August 11, 2011, Latrell called Ashley and asked where she was. She replied that she was doing a manicure at a salon. He then started shouting, if she doesn't put money into his prison account, he will beat her mother. How could she be so close to the prison and not bring the money? What did she feel? Ashley's father, Michael Benson, wondered, what did they say to her to make her do all these things or keep quiet about it? After their daughter's murder, Michael and Jody often received calls from other young women trapped in human trafficking. These women were looking for answers to their own questions. These girls feel like there is no way out, and at some point they will also be killed, Jody says. I tell them, I know you were threatened, but our daughter didn't turn to us for help, and look where it got her. It's one of those cases that leaves a dual feeling for a number of reasons. On one hand, it was a great example of coordinated and skilled police work. Detectives and prosecutors managed to find the killer and secure his conviction. On the other hand, it's disheartening that despite having a loving family that genuinely cared for Ashley, worried about her, and wished the best for her, most of the men in her life treated her as something to exploit for their own purposes. It makes you wonder if all the criminals involved in this case got what they deserved.